Welcome to Back from the Abyss. This is a place for stories of hope and healing, recovery, and redemption. I'm Dr. Craig Heacock. Before we start today's story, I wanted to announce that Hillary McBride and I will again be teaching our intensive seminar on transference and countertransference for clinicians. It's called I Love You, I Hate You, Are You My Mom? It's going to take place this February in Joshua Tree, California. Check out my website, craigheacockmd.com, for more details and registration. We still have a few slots open. In today's story, we explore what it's like to be on the autistic spectrum, and more specifically, how a later life diagnosis can totally change the way you view the world and yourself. Aurelie, our storyteller today, was an autism expert. She was a clinical psychologist who had trained with some of the premier autism experts in the country, yet she didn't discover her own autism until she was 40 years old. This episode explores why women on the spectrum are so often missed, how women on the autistic spectrum are often masters of masking, which means imitating the mannerisms and behaviors of neurotypical people, thus allowing them to both fit in and also to be left hiding in plain sight. A final note here. Throughout the recording, Aurelie was using a little plastic toothpick as a fidget object. And as we recorded, I didn't realize how much this would show up on the recording. So when you listen to Aurelie and you hear a little tap, tap, tap in the background, that's her little soothing toothpick.
I had a son who was already diagnosed autistic, and I had coughed that off to his father's genetics. But my daughter went to middle school, and it was a large public middle school, and within 3 months, her mental health just tanked. It got her evaluated. She was identified as autistic and ADHD. At that moment, that opened my eyes to the possibility that the genetics might have also come from me.
But up until that point, it hadn't occurred to you that maybe you were on the autistic spectrum?
Never.
Yeah.
Nope.
Even though you were, about 40?
Mm-hmm.
And you were a trained clinical psychologist
Yep.
in the biz.
Yep.
Been working with clients, patients for years. And
trained by very good autism centers, 2 of them in this country, and no one suspected anything. So the next piece of this was COVID. It was just about the time where we were starting to get out of COVID lockdown. COVID had a big impact on autistic people. Some people loved it because now they don't have to transition. They didn't have to transition out of their house. They got to stay at home, which is often a very safe place. And then on the other hand, some people got very thrown off by their changes in routines. But people were at home looking on the internet, doing research, and at that time there were TikTok videos and Instagrammers who were starting to share their experiences. And I remember this one woman in particular. She was about my age. She was a self-employed photographer, and as she was sharing her story and her reasons for seeking an evaluation, I really identified with a lot of things that she said. That was definitely eye-opening. And then the third reason I think I discovered autism was the partner that I had at the time. At the time, I was in a fairly new relationship. I remember us talking about me, and she was sharing some of the ways that I was coming across to other people. We were all in a women's mountain biking group, and she was saying things like, "You're one of the quietest people I've ever known," which is interesting because I thought I talked too much with her. She said I was mysterious, very private, hard to read. Other girls in the group had mentioned that they weren't sure if I liked them or not. And all of this was a bit surprising to me. I didn't know that how I was coming across was different than my internal experience. And all of those things together just opened up this possibility. And then I did my research. Most autistic people, they spend a lot of time researching and analyzing and sorting through data and looking back at my life and how it was in the past and then how I moved through the world now. At one point, I just knew that I was autistic.
When you started to put that together, what do you remember about that? I can imagine there could be a whole mix of thoughts and feelings that, again, you're a mother with 2 children, and again, you work in psychology and you're an expert, and you're just realizing this really important thing that's completely shaped the way you live in the world and interact with people and view yourself and your species.
I think my big initial reaction was I was just fascinated. I was so interested in women and masking. Not a lot was known about that. I just did a deep dive, and I think over time the other experience was that of relief. Mm-hmm. Many autistic people go back in their life and look at their story and think about it from a new lens, and there have been plenty of situations that were really tough for me, and many that I had a lot of shame about, and I just could let myself off the hook.
Yeah, before we go back, because I really want to go back in your life and look at what happened, how things turned out from this new perspective. But why do you think people missed it in you? It could have been sort of your age cohort, and I don't know. Could there be maybe a lot of individual reasons? But one thing you and I had talked about a little before is this whole idea of masking, and I wonder if you might just say a little more about masking, and sort of the follow-up question to that is, were you an incredibly good masker, and that's why nobody noticed that in you?
Yes, definitely. Very good at masking. I became kind of a shapeshifter. From an early age, I figured out through patterns and analysis what people want and what they like, and I was able to be that for them. I think also my interests were within the normal range that people would think. I'm a mountain biker now, and I did a lot of running when I was younger. My special interest was in autism, and
really, wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of individuals who wonder about their autism becomes their special interest. Like, they just learn everything about it, and but other things like plants and animals, and it was from the outside nothing different about those things.
So you, again, in basically midlife, find out that you have this diagnosis, and this is just 2 or 3 years ago that you get a formal autism diagnosis.
Yes. After I did my own analysis and was sure that I was right, that this was correct. And I had already known at that time that I was going to shift my practice to focus on women and girls.
Mm-hmm. And how did that feel? So you have this big insight about yourself. You're shifting the course of your practice. Do you remember looking back, you had mentioned that it was fascinating. Was it like, oh, great, here's this whole new way of viewing myself, and I'm going to shift my practice. And it was just largely kind of a positive thing versus, I don't know, there being something hard about finding that out, or frustrating, or even maybe angering that you live with that for so long without knowing.
I think that's a common experience for people. I don't think I experienced frustration. I think I experienced a lot of grief. Definitely wondering what it would have been like had I known when I was younger. Also ADHD, I was also identified with that and had no idea. And I think that was a trigger for many challenging moments in my youth. Wonder sometimes how things would have been different had I known earlier and had my parents known.
Just before we started recording, I used the metaphor. I said it's almost like at age 40, like those optometrist machines that you look through and they flip the lenses. It's almost like you've been looking through these two lenses and then thunk, thunk, you're looking through these new lenses like, oh, you have autism. And now you're realizing everything is different. And maybe everything is actually in better focus and you can see in a way you never thought was possible, but it also, everything has changed. What if we start just looking back, you, your family of origin, who you were as a little kid and your family, and what have been some of the ways that you've had to rewrite your history, re-understand who you were? Because I know from our preparation for the story that you went through some really hard stuff as a kid, but I'm really curious here, how having your perspective totally shifted in your 40s has allowed you to sort of rewrite what happened.
Yes, it absolutely has. So my family was my father, my mother, 2 older brothers, and then me. We were all born in France, immigrated here when I was very young. Right off the bat, there was a lot of conflict between my parents, and that conflict has persisted until today. At the time I understood that as just the way that my father is, and then the way that my mother is, and my father, at the time when I was growing up, was a very intimidating man, controlling, critical. I remember he used to correct my language if I didn't say something properly. I remember this hike that we did on Thanksgiving, and he was yelling at me because I kept tripping over the roots and the rocks, which now I think was more related to sensory processing. So I started looking at my feet to make sure that I was stepping in the right place, and then he was yelling at me for looking down, and nothing I could do was right by him. He did not in any way, shape, or form understand children, and particularly a girl. He was my brother's soccer coach and, could relate to them as males, but he didn't have a clue about how to raise a daughter. Now I understand that it was autism that really made this hard for him. One of the things that I remember experiencing was being almost his friend. The things that he wanted to do, he would bring me along to, but they were all very adult kinds of experiences. We would go to the movies, and I watched Citizen Kane and The Godfather, and I was 7 or 8. He's a big cyclist, and he would have me go on rides with him that were very long, 50 miles. I remember crying while riding behind him. And at the dinner table, he was always talking about French philosophers or composers, or I thought I was supposed to be able to talk like that, and felt like not good enough for not being able to. And there were even, he was very rigid with money, and originally I thought that was post-war kind of trauma, but it was more related to his autism.
You only put that together after you had discovered your own autism, like looking back and you realized, oh, this is where this came from. Came from Dad. Yeah.
I used to get warts as a child on my fingers, and he would take me to the garage and burn them off with a soldering iron instead of taking me to the doctor. And it was so painful, and I don't think he had any idea how I felt. And even now when he tells the story, he laughs about it, but it's
like he had no idea how to conceptualize you as a kid. He had no idea how to put himself in your shoes.
Exactly.
He's like, here's a little person. This person can be my companion. We're just going to do what I want to do. Come on, little person.
Yep. Yeah. And expected me to be able to think and communicate like an adult. And I just felt like I was failing and not good enough. And he, I don't remember him hugging me or saying, I love you. He certainly never played with me. I just felt invisible, just in his way.
Do you think, looking back, little you, did you feel like something was, I don't know, unlovable or broken or wrong with you? Or maybe alternatively, did actually having autism then maybe could provide some kind of protective value because you could just think, well, this is the way it is. Like, look at my dad, this is what he does. I guess this is what daughters and dads do. They try to talk about French philosophy and watch movies over their head and do bike rides that are not possible for the daughter to do. Like, this is just like the normal. I wonder, I could see where it could have gone both ways. I wonder what that was like. And again, this kind of goes back with this idea of looking back through this lens, that this is what you're describing sounds so painful, but I wonder if it was differentially painful for you because of how you're wired.
Yes, definitely. Autistic people are incredibly sensitive people, and we have very big feelings and very deep feelings, and things that happen to us, we feel them much more strongly than other people.
I wonder too, Aurelie, this is a side note, but I think this is really important, and I was going to bring this up later, but in some ways, I wonder if I've been setting you up to I've been asking impossible questions, because one of the things that I want to talk about a little later was alexithymia. It's a word that means without words for mood. And alexithymia is a term that we use for people who really struggle to describe their internal states, their emotions, their feelings. And that is a kind of classic symptom of autism. I don't know if that is always true, but it's often true. So I want to apologize here. I realize I'm asking you these sort of retrospective questions about how you felt or what was going on, but I'm seeing kind of the pain in your face and looking like you're really thinking hard on this, and there was clearly a lot of strong feelings. And again, I think it's almost like a here and now example of something I struggle with in my work when I'm working with people on the autistic spectrum, that I expect them sometimes to be able to talk about their feelings. Yeah. So again, I just wanted to point that out to the listeners. I think we can talk more about that later, but I'll try to quit asking you about your internal states.
No, I think when I was a child, I was very anxious, very insecure, but it showed up through body symptoms. I had acid reflux. I felt sick a lot. Certainly, didn't develop any kind of vocabulary or understanding of feelings from either of my parents. They're both alexithymic as well, and with the trauma, certainly emotions were not things that were talked about in my home. I remember though, so my mother, during her, as I was growing up, she was searching for love, searching for validation, and met a couple of men. And at 13, when I was 13, she left. She moved out to be with someone. And at that point, I started my reckless adolescence, and I think I just stuffed all of those anxious feelings down and sort of shifted almost the other way of just being very confident and rebellious. And
But was it that you were trying to take on a persona that you weren't? You know, as they talk about reaction formation, this idea of doing the exact opposite of how you feel. I wonder, were you so anxious and, you know, kind of unhappy and stressed and not comfortable in your skin that you just said, okay, I have to do the opposite? Or was there actually something really rebellious and wild that was busting out?
both. Both, I think. Obviously, none of this was conscious, but yeah, I think I just needed to survive. And the anxiety, again, we autistic people have very, very strong feelings, and it was probably so overwhelming, and this was just a way to completely disengage from that and take control of my life. But little did I know, I was actually like slowly falling into a much worse mental health state. But I did not realize that either.
Yeah, what did that look like? How did that develop through your adolescent years?
So as an adolescent, kind of had two personas. There was one that, again, was rebellious and engaging in destructive behaviors and, you know, putting myself in positions where I had a lot of control and I had a lot of power. But on the other, I had this other persona, and I think this is masking that was doing all the things that I was supposed to be doing as a adolescent. Was making great grades. I was on the track and cross country team. I got into UNC. What people saw on the outside was not the same as what was happening in real life. And I think that's a common experience for autistic people, is how they show up is very different than what's going on internally. But I went to UNC, moved out, and again was on the one hand functioning very, very well. I was making straight A's. I was working a job. I became a really competent runner. I was doing a lot of races and usually was always in the top 3. And I remember taking a painting class at UNC. I just loved all the different kinds of things I could learn. I love learning. So I got my grade at the end of the semester, and he gave me a B. And of course I had all A's at that point. And I completely fell apart. I was just sobbing and thought that was a strange reaction. And so I walked down to the student health center and had got an appointment with the counselor. And by the end of that appointment, they had withdrawn me from school, set me up with a psychiatrist and a psychologist. I had severe depression, severe anxiety, and a very bad eating disorder.
But you didn't really know that. You had to get a B in your art class and get evaluated for that, for you to realize, oh wow, I'm falling apart completely.
And that's autistic people are black and white, and definitely often alexithymic, and it takes getting to an extreme before noticing something like that.
So that's where treatment started. That's where you first got into some kind of counseling or psychiatric help. Yeah.
Yes, I got on Prozac. I saw a therapist, and I did start to feel better, and then just stopped doing any kind of treatment and continued on. But at that point, I knew I was not healthy, and I was also using substances to just manage the feelings, and the eating disorder definitely gave me control. And a lot of autistic people actually have eating disorders. And looking back, I remember one of the pieces that was so reinforcing to me was the sensory soothing aspect of eating certain foods. It was interesting because as a child, too, I used to hide in my closet and eat candy to self-soothe. And yeah, that became just a way to manage my feelings.
It reminds me, gosh, way back during my training, during my child and adolescent psych rotation, I remember learning from one of the child psychiatrists that if you see an adolescent or kid that has a whole bunch of psych diagnoses, first thing to think is autism. And now it's interesting to hear you say this, eating disorder. I think later we're going to talk about ADD, borderline stuff, OCD. Like there's so many DSM diagnoses that actually all fit nicely under kind of the big tent of autism.
Yep.
It sounds like you were experiencing depression.
And depression, yeah. And OCD. I remember washing my hands so many times. And yes, I remember being curled up in the fetal position in my bed, was thinking of suicide.
Yeah, and I'm guessing, again, you talked about the grief of not knowing, all those years not knowing what was wrong at the core. If we could have gone back then to your college-age self with, this long list of psychiatric diagnoses and said, hey, really the core of all this, the reason that you have depression and suicidality and substance abuse and OCD and eating disorder, all this is that you are on the autistic spectrum, you have autism, and that is literally tearing you apart, and you don't realize it.
Yep, exactly. I didn't realize it at all, and there was no way to really meet the needs that I had as an autistic person. And so I was just covering it up with this and that and trying to escape extreme discomfort, extreme feelings. Just definitely very perfectionistic, which is a common autistic experience, and making any mistakes would just make me spiral out.
What about looking back again through the autistic lens, what was it like, the training to become a clinical psychologist, being someone who's neuroatypical, when I'm guessing the vast majority of faculty and supervisors and people in the program were probably neurotypical, and also just imagining what has to happen to get trained as a psychologist. Like you're doing a lot of work that involves emotion and reading others and mentalization and tasks that, were and are very difficult for you.
Yeah. Most of what I remember from graduate school in terms of challenges was all the kind of group discussions that we needed to do. And I was terrified to speak, to say the wrong thing. And I was really confused as to why I was an outsider to, groups that were being formed between my cohort. I didn't experience anything challenging with my faculty. In fact, I remembered a class where we learned how to interview people, like an initial interview. I sat down with someone and we were being taped, or the class was watching behind a mirror, and I spoke to this student, and I think I was just so hyper focused and so attentive to his suffering. Autistic people can be hyper empathic. Mm-hmm. In this particular situation, the professor of the class took me aside and told me that he had never seen someone do such an excellent job. So that was
That must have felt good.
It did feel good.
Yeah. What about too, looking back with this lens in your early years in your career, like what, again, understanding now more about your brain, about who you are, what were some of the strengths you think you bring into being a psychologist, having autism, and what are the things that make it, consistently challenging for you?
Good question. As it relates to autism, I'm assuming, yeah.
Because clearly you're super smart. Like that's going to serve you well in, anything you did. But, you experience people and relationships differently. And you feel deeply. Like those are both true.
Well, I think one thing is, and this is true for autistic people, most autistic people, is just they grow up feeling like they're broken, something's wrong with them, they're not good enough. And there's this tremendous amount of desire to help other people who've experienced the same thing. And I think just going beyond, there's just a connection that I would have with people and a desire to help, and just kind of an unwavering compassion. And because we know how painful feelings are, I think we are just so careful about validating other people's experiences, being very careful not to do or say anything that would be harmful. Autistic people can be very, we spend our lives like observing and analyzing people and integrating, what comes naturally to others more through an intellectual process. But we get very good at being attuned to little details and shifts, and we can absorb other people's emotions. And I think the attunement can be quite strong.
Your practice now is primarily or exclusively people with autism, and largely women and girls. Is that right?
Yeah.
What if you could do a thought experiment and imagine that your practice tomorrow was only neurotypical people?
Yeah.
What would be different for you? What would change? What would be gained? What would be lost? Do you think you could do really good, consistent, meaningful work with that population, and or would it, lead you to autistic burnout and overwhelm more quickly? Or am I making an artificial distinction here? And actually, because you're a well-trained psychologist, you could work with either population equally well. And let me just preface that with saying, I have a bunch of patients on the spectrum, and I think I do not do well with them. Sometimes they leave and I feel like I should have offered them a discount, or I should apologize. There have been times I call them and apologize. I really feel like I'm often missing the boat, and I'm constantly trying to learn. I have a few questions about that before we wrap up. But yeah, I do think I'm way, way better with neurotypical people. And maybe that's because that's what I am and that's what I've been trained with. Or maybe, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know, because I don't think I've spent a lot of time doing therapy with neurotypical people. I think at this point in my career and in my life, through practice and through just sheer intelligence, I've gotten very good at figuring out and being empathic. It wasn't a natural thing, but I can do it, and I do it very well. And I use scripts and systems to help me as well. And I think that I'm not sure that it would impact my work with neurotypical people that much.
What do you think you would advise me if you were my supervisor and I came to you regularly and said, help me be more effective and a better psychiatrist and a better therapist with my patients on the spectrum? I just feel like I don't do nearly as good a work with them despite my best efforts. I feel like I work way harder. I feel I never know where I stand with them. They often walk out of the office and I think, did I help you at all? When I try to check in with them to see the nature of our relationship, or if we're moving forward in treatment, or what could we do to make things better. You don't get any constructive, offerings or criticism. Like many of the sort of here and now psychodynamic interpersonal ways that I work with most people just fall completely flat with my folks on the spectrum. So I'm going to try to be flexible, but I really don't feel like I do good work with them. And I'm guessing I'm not alone. I think there's probably many neurotypical therapists across the country who feel like they're not serving their ASD clients' patients very well.
Well, I do in general think it's best for autistic people to go to therapists who have expertise in autism. Mm-hmm. I think part of kind of psychodynamic or interpersonal work is quite like open-ended and talking about feelings. Both of those are extremely hard for autistic people. We usually need to back up and teach them what they're sensing inside their bodies, and that there's a name to those things, and how to name feelings, and how to communicate those to other people. Mm-hmm. They really struggle with kind of open-ended exploration, like what do you want me to say? Where do I start? What's the point? I think they often need more structure and direction and clarity around what they're doing and where they're going. And I think typically talk therapy, we just go straight to emotions, and a lot of autistic people in therapy, they need first to regulate their nervous systems. They spend their entire life with their nervous systems being activated, and their sensory system also. And
I wonder too, like I'm sure I'm not recognizing that very well in my neuroatypical patients, that they need their nervous system regulated. I think I can pick that up much better with my neurotypical people, but I'm sure there are times where people, ASD patients coming in, and I think they're fine, and they're not fine at all, but they're not really willing or able to tell me that, and so I'm just moving forward, assuming that they're in a kind of level of neurological arousal where we can actually, quote unquote, do some work, but they are completely unable to do that, and I just can't read it.
Yeah, definitely. The internal world of autistic people is vastly different than what they present as and what shows up and what you can see. And oftentimes they may look calm or maybe flat, but inside it's chaos. Mm-hmm. And without addressing that chaos, you're not going to get very far.
Too, we as therapists, we want to be liked. Everyone wants to be liked, but I think we really want to be liked. And it can be so hard when you work with people on the spectrum to tell if they like you. There's a number of patients that I worked with for years who are on the autistic spectrum that they'd leave and I think, okay, not only did I not help them, they don't even like me. And I don't even know why they keep coming back. But they did mostly, and, I want people to leave, and part of this is my Enneagram 7. I want people to leave and like, hey, that was a great session. It was really good. We got stuff done. It was interesting and provocative and deep. And so it almost goes, my work with people on the spectrum is like the anti-7 work. Like I have to just settle into being a kind of me, a flavor of me that is just really difficult to totally change kind of my expectations and hopes and my own needs. Because I think, it's hard for we therapists and psychiatrists, psychologists to admit that we have our own needs. We want to feel useful. We want to feel like what we're doing is helping. It's not just transactional. We need to feel like we're actually important to the client patient. I think a lot of my work with people on the spectrum, I feel like I'm not a factor in their life at all. I'm like a blip that just pops up at Monday at 8:30. But again, it can be so difficult to explore because I want to dive in on that. Like, what's happening with our relationship? What's happening in the space between us? What do you think I think of you? What do you, when you leave this session, what kinds of thoughts and feelings are you going to have about what happened, what didn't happen? And those kinds of dynamics usually, or strategies usually just fall totally flat. So I guess what I'm hearing from you is I need to maybe, some of my folks, maybe have them work with somebody who's just, right, either themselves has that same kind of neurotypical, worldview experience, and or just really understands that they can put themselves in their shoes and work with that.
Yeah, I think again, kind of missing the boat. Before being able to do that kind of deep exploration, they need to know how to identify what they think and what they feel. And oftentimes, the best way to start a relationship with an autistic client is to be curious about their interests and stay there for longer than you would think. I think sometimes people feel like maybe they're not doing good work because they're talking about a special interest, but that is really the way to connect with autistic people. And because they live a life of being, gaslit, they're highly misunderstood, and they're told they're too much or not enough. It's incredibly hard, I think, to develop trust, and that happens very slowly. And
that's really helpful because I guess I've known that intellectually, but it's so hard for me to do that because, I do feel guilty. I feel like, okay, these people are paying me good money and we're talking about, whatever, birding or, trains or game of magic or, whatever. And it's interesting. And, I actually, one of my favorite things to do is talk to somebody who's really passionate about a subject. So, I'll sit by somebody on the plane and talk for them for 4 hours about their special interest. But I'm thinking, as a therapist, psychiatrist, like, okay, we're here to get some work done, make some progress. And so I have found myself thinking, okay, maybe we can talk about your special interest for 2.5 minutes. And then we got to get after it. But I really appreciate you saying, no, that actually might be, that might be weeks and weeks and weeks of work. Many, many, many hours of that being a way to sort of settle in to a relationship.
Yeah, I think it's also really important. Feelings are scary. A lot of autistic people are phobic of feelings because they are so strong. And they have such, memories, especially for difficult times. As soon as you bring something, as soon as something comes up, they can re-experience it, and in a very strong way. There's a lot of shame that can come with having feelings, and I think it's just really important to have a kind of a structure almost to the session to help them kind of contain that, and also just an unwavering validation of their experience.
Aurelie, you had said earlier in the recording that part of sort of the wake up for you was starting to see all these women showing up at your office and during and after COVID who were talking about maybe being on the spectrum, and that was starting to alert you to that. I have realized I have a huge blind spot for women on the autistic spectrum. Just the other day, I think I told you about this, a woman I've been seeing for many years. It finally hit me after probably 10 years of seeing her. that she's on the autistic spectrum. And I have women coming to me regularly of all ages, either just declaring I have autism or, I think I'm on the autistic spectrum. And I've gotten to the point now where if someone asks me that, I'll tell them, you know what, I think probably I'm the worst person in the world to weigh in an opinion on that because I clearly miss it all the time. And I'm guessing I'm not alone. I'm wondering if there's any sort of, guidance or tips or you might help me with that would help me pick up these women who are masking so well, because I feel like it's not hard with men. Maybe that's men. I'm guessing it's because men on the autistic spectrum just don't need to mask as much because the social tolerance for men, there's just a much bigger bell curve for how you can be as a man. I think there's a much smaller bell curve for how you can be as a woman. What kind of guidance could you give me and others about it when we're sitting with someone, and she says, I think I'm on the spectrum. Like, how do we, short of, we could get neuropsych testing. Yeah, I'm all for that. But how might we better recognize that and conceptualize that?
Yeah, well, there's two parts kind of to your question, I think, is why are some of these people being missed? And oftentimes they don't even have an idea that they're on the spectrum. Mm-hmm. They're just living their masked life, and they don't know what to report because it's not even a concept. But for the women who come in saying they're on the spectrum, autistic people, again, will research to the death when something is interesting to them or when they don't understand something. And they do it until they feel pretty confident. You're either right or you're wrong in an autistic person's mind. So I think for most of these people, you can assume that they're probably right about it, and referring them to get evaluated.
Yeah, that gives us my sense too, because it's probably not something that people are just going to volunteer. Like, yeah, I want this diagnosis. I think there is sort of some current in the mental health world that, gosh, why are so many people showing up saying they're on the spectrum? This is the diagnosis du jour. I think there might be some truth to that, but there's a lot more awareness now. As you said, there's a lot more social media information and presence with this. But I also wonder, again, especially women, so many were missed for so long, like you. Yeah. That it's just now in the 2020s that we're really waking up to a whole group of women who've, again, often suffered with this long list of severe psychiatric diagnoses when actually those were all just symptoms. That wasn't the core issue.
Yeah. Yes. I often remove diagnoses from their list when they come in.
I have at least, I probably have at least 3 patients who do maintenance ketamine treatments for quote unquote autistic burnout. Mm-hmm. And when the first one came, 3-4 years ago and said, yeah, I want to do ketamine for my autistic burnout. First of all, I'd never heard that expression. Maybe this is 4 or 5 years ago. And 2, when she asked me, well, is it going to help? I think it will help. I had no idea because first of all, I didn't really even know what that was. Well, it turns out it does really help for autistic burnout. And so, I have seen that, but I wonder if you might explain what is autistic burnout and more specifically, how do you experience it?
Sure. Autistic burnout is not the same thing as vocational burnout or parenting burnout. It's a extreme condition that individuals develop because they've lived a lifetime being neurodivergent and being misdiagnosed or undiagnosed and not having the supports that they need to live in a neurotypical world. And from a very young age, I see young children, girls under 10 who are already showing signs of autistic burnout, but for their entire lives, their nervous system is firing off. Over time, they start to experience significant regressions in their skills, oftentimes working memory or executive function, They have a hard time just doing basic self-care. They experience tremendous loss of energy. For example, probably about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I did a race called the Point to Point in Park City. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's all throughout the mountains in Park City. It's 78 miles, I think, and you climb maybe 15,000 feet in elevation. It's a very difficult race, and I did it. It took me nine and a half hours, and I only stopped for 5 minutes to eat a sandwich, and I ended up getting second place. And just a few years later, I couldn't even walk up the stairs without being out of breath. And it's just a massive, basically shutting down of person's system.
So it's like a profound physical fatigue, but also kind of a profound cognitive and emotional fatigue.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Often a lot of dysregulation that comes with it as well. And unmasking. Can't mask anymore. That's why some people show up, is their bodies are just forcing them to seek help.
How do you prevent and also treat your own autistic burnout?
Well, that's one of the reasons why it was so helpful for me to know I was autistic. I had actually been falling into burnout for years before I knew. I never used any kind of medication except for that short period of time when I was in college. And now I am on so many medications. The worst aspect, a lot of people get autoimmune conditions or feelings show up in their body. And for me, I developed severe daily chronic migraine. Or I have to get infusions. And
so when you say so many medications, mostly medical?
Yes.
Not psychiatric?
Both.
Oh, both, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Both. That was one of the things that was really helpful for me, understanding I'm autistic, is also that I'm an autistic burnout. And
have you tried ketamine?
No, but I would love to.
Yeah, you should, for sure.
Yeah. So I've made significant changes in my life to help with the burnout. One was narrowing down my focus to women and girls. It's just the more monotropic focus I can have, the better.
I don't know that word, monotropic.
It's used in the autism community just to say that we focus on one thing at a time deeply. Our brains don't shift very well. And so part of burnout often is, it started when I had started my career and my children, and there were just so many sheer numbers of demands and things I had to take care of, and anything I do well and put everything into, and it was just switching my attention to so many different things, and that really contributed to burnout. But so I kind of narrowed my focus at my job. I reduced the number of hours that I work. Yes. So one of the most important things is rest. Oftentimes it can look a lot like depression because they're just so shut down and not doing things, and it's hard to get out of bed. And oftentimes with depression, what's helpful is behavioral activation to get people moving. But in autistic burnout, they need rest and recovery. They need quiet. They need low sensory environments.
Almost like what you would recommend after a head injury. People get a TBI, bad concussion, right? Like no screens, low light, rest.
Yep.
Just fully, just like get in the dark.
Yep.
Just like minimize the neurological input to your brain.
Yes. Outsourcing tasks. So reducing the number of demands, like getting a food service or having your laundry done by someone else, getting people to clean your house, hiring an executive, like a surrogate executive function person to do all the demands. Spending time in nature is often very helpful. I have a swing in my room. My kids do too, and I swing. And mountain biking also gives me sensory input that is very calming. Having a plan, because people in burnout are often very terrified. They, can't hold a job. They can't parent their kids. There's a lot of shame around that, and it's just the unknown. The unknown is so scary for autistic people. So having kind of a plan, like for the next 6 months, we're gonna focus on these things.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I never prescribe rest. I need to do that. I'm always like, okay, you need to walk, do yoga, run, bike. Because again, so much of what I'm seeing, people need some physical activation. But you're right, there's some subset, including people on the spectrum, who at times, I think you're right, what they need is deep, deep rest. Yeah, almost like post-TBI rest.
Yeah, kind of like in caveman times. After killing a saber-toothed tiger, they all went into the cave and slept. And that really is what the experience of an autistic person is. They're constantly in fight or flight.
Yeah, life is one big saber-toothed tiger. Yeah. I wonder, as we're wrapping up here, to go a little meta, and I wonder if you might just spend a couple minutes talking about your decision to reach out to me about your story and then to come here. You flew halfway across the country to come to Fort Collins to record this, which is such an honor. It's such a gift. And I think, as I mentioned, the Fishbowl at the end of last season, almost all our stories now are people who reach out to me from all over the country. And the first few seasons were mostly my patients, but now it's people who are coming so far away. And each time it happens, I'm so touched. And so when I first got your email, but tell me a little bit more about why, because this has been a big time, financial and emotional commitment to come out here and do this. Yeah,
well, I was listening to your podcast, which I love, hearing people's stories and learning about how you work with people. And I was just going through story after story after story, and there's the first one, a woman who was talking about being depressed as a young child and throughout her life, and never really knowing why. Like, she could never come up with a clear answer. And as I listened to her story, and I'm very detail oriented. My brain is detail oriented, so I hear all these details that come along with the autism presentation. And
you said he's missing it. Heacock's totally missing it.
No, actually, I was thinking like she would it might really help her to understand, like to make meaning out of this her life, and to fill in the missing pieces. It's just the greatest amount of validation to really know why.
Because when you reached out to me, or at least one of our communications, you said something like, hey, do you know that at least 2 of the storytellers on Back from the Abyss, 2 of the women, have undiagnosed autism? I'm quite sure of it. I was so struck by that, and I also thought, knowing me, that's probably the case, because I would have missed it.
More than that.
You're right. Yeah.
A lot of women and men come because something's been missing in their life, and they're searching. And autistic people are truth seekers, and they're very authentic, and they're honest, and they're engineers, and they want to understand how things work, how they work, and they want the truth. And so part of it was just maybe providing some, guidance and understanding so that people can be recognized and identified and understand themselves.
I'm so glad you reached out to me. Yeah, I literally remember getting your email and thinking like, okay, this is exactly who I want to talk to. And then I saw that you live so far away. I thought, I hope you'll come this far. And then when I talked to you on the phone, you said, sure, I'll come out there. I thought, yay. I guess it helps to be in Colorado, right? If Back from the Abyss we're in, I'm not going to diss any other states. There's certain states that if I were in, I might not get people to travel. But it's usually a pretty easy invite to get people to come to Colorado.
Yeah, especially if you love nature and mountain biking.
Yeah.
I was very excited by the idea at the beginning, and it was definitely one of those surges of energy and excitement that autistic people can get when they're onto something that's important to them. And then as the time actually came closer to come, my excitement turned into dread.
I know you were so nervous. Yeah, that's okay.
So nervous.
Yeah. Part of my role here is to be like a coach, like I'm sending you out on the field. Like, you can do this. All you have to do is just take the ball, throw it down the field. It's going to work.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to talk about rejection sensitivity dysphoria. It's very common. It was first identified in people with ADHD, but very, very common in autism, and actually 80% of people have both. But it is another reason that we have chronic nervous system activation is because of this kind of automatic fight or flight reaction that people with RSD can have when faced with any kind of rejection. And that can be, correction too, making mistakes, be disappointing someone. And we become extremely perfectionistic. We become people pleasers. So we avoid, that experience.
Has that been happening with me?
The anticipation, of saying something wrong or getting stuck, and that just the intensity of the feelings. I mean, some people feel pain, and some people have suicidal thoughts. A lot of times it's internalized and it sets off a huge inner critic. Making mistakes and being right and not being wrong are almost like survival, emotional survival. And then for me in particular too, because I'm autistic and because of, I think, my early experiences feeling inferior at the dinner table, talking about Nietzsche and Beethoven, just speaking and communicating is hard. And if there's any kind of anxiety, it just goes through, like it just breaks apart.
And yet here you are, leaning into your fear, coming out here, speaking into the mic. It was brave for you to come. And yeah, it means a lot to me. I know it's going to mean a lot to the listeners. So thank you. I think of psychiatric diagnoses as being most helpful, not when used as a label, but rather as a way of better understanding each person's unique perspective and way of experiencing the world. Autism spectrum disorder is indeed not even a parsimonious diagnosis. It's a syndrome. It's a large tent with a vast array of clinical presentations and signs and symptoms of totally unknown etiologies. And each person with ASD has their own gifts and challenges. And as clinicians, our task is to continually remind ourselves that our patients are almost surely not experiencing the world the way we are. Our task is to do our very best to put ourselves into our patients' shoes, to try to see what they see, to feel what they feel, to practice experiencing the world in a new and at times profoundly different way. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a story from one of my patients about the magic of psychopharmacology to completely change the course of a life-wrecking mood disorder. And as always, Chris and I love to get your comments, thoughts, and suggestions. You can reach out to us on my website, craigheacockmd.com.